Hi. Unfortunately, we have quite a few fools out there in our world. People who can't tell when they're being easily tricked by bogus arguments that lack good evidence or sound deductive reasoning. These are the same people who, in their own claims, lack good evidence to back them up. Check out my lessons on critical thinking that I've delivered to my high school students. See if my lessons can be of help to you. Check it out.
What ability would give you the most power you could have? What ability would it be? I don't want you to share that. I just want you to think about it.
Can we write it down?
I don't want you to write it down. What ability, a special ability, could make you the most powerful ever?
Tom Brady.
And I
No, he cheats.
want to introduce you. Now that I've got your attention, we're not going to discuss, not yet. We're going to talk about this concept. Okay, so now to persuade, you're talking about the ability to convince someone, write this down, okay, so let's agree on this definition. I'd like it in your notes. Persuasion is the ability to convince someone to believe or do something. Now, I asked you about what would be an ability that could give you ultimate power. Imagine if you had this ability absolutely, okay? So that is to say, every time you tried to persuade someone, you succeeded. You had absolute gift of persuasion. That would mean every time you tried to get someone to believe or do something, they'd do it or believe it. If you were a salesman, you would never not get the sale. And you would be the most rich person for your commissions of always persuading people to buy your product or to go with your corporation's production. If you were a teacher, your students would always succeed because they'd always be persuaded to do the assignments and to study, and they would not fall through the cracks. So you'd have the highest test scores of any teacher. If you were an attorney, you would never lose a case, right? Because every time you tried to make an argument to the jury, you would win because they would believe you.
Oh, and you'd get free food. You could get free food from like every restaurant.
I guess that would work too. What if you were a politician? You would never lose an election, right? Okay. You would, anytime you ran for office, you would be given the vote. People would never question. And in fact, would you not agree that some of the most powerful people throughout human history have been some of the most persuasive?
Yes.
Okay. Can you think of anyone who would fit that description? Genghis Khan, probably very persuasive. We've all seen the newsreels of Adolf Hitler, at the podium. Now, along with persuasion, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to write this term down, dissuasion, which is the opposite of persuasion. It's convincing someone not to believe or not to do something. So this could be just as important. If all you could do is persuade, you might need to dissuade someone, not to do something that could be dangerous, etc. Talk people out of something. Okay, now, in trying to be persuasive, a lot of you sitting here probably, I think the movies kind of give people this sense, but a lot of you probably think the way to persuade is through physical violence, right? In fact, if you took a gun and put it right here against my head and clicked the trigger, the hammer back so I could hear that, and you start pushing, unless I had a death wish, I'd probably go whichever way you told me to go. Because that's very persuasive. Now, What happens once the threat of that gun is gone?
You could say whatever you wanted to say and whatever you got to.
Or let's say the gun jams. Okay, the threat of that gun is gone, or it jams. Where were we?
This way.
We were talking about violence.
Oh yeah, it gets jammed.
Okay, so here's the thing. If you force me to do something I don't want to do, you persuade me with putting a gun to my head, unless I'm crazy, I'm going to do it. You're going to get your way. But have you changed my mind?
No.
In fact, if you think about wars, think about America's own Civil War, where the northern states went down and tried to change the mind of the southern states, right? About slavery and their attitudes down there about how they were going to keep their plantations. The North decided after the Emancipation Proclamation, we're going to go down there and change everything. After the North went down there and brutally just leveled the plantations and burned the cities, killed off a lot of the Southern soldiers, totally, the South was left in ashes, right? Did the Southern mindset get changed about slavery? Did the Southern people all of a sudden think, oh, we were so wrong about our lifestyle? Now we see it. We should have never had slaves. Is that what happened? No. They gave in because of the physical violence that they endured, okay? But what happened was you had the KKK, the burning crosses at night, the lynchings, the Jim Crow laws, right, which you guys have been learning about in your history class. And it wasn't until 1967 that those Jim Crow laws became outlawed and full rights were restored to the blacks down there. Okay, so minds weren't changed. So there's a man who lived in the 4th century BC. I want you to write his name down. His name was Aristotle. And he came up with a system in ancient Athens. How are we going to persuade people that would be better than physical violence? Because as we've demonstrated, the problem with physical violence is you might get your way temporarily, but you haven't changed hearts and minds. And that's where the real power is. Would you agree with that? If you can really change the way someone's thinking, change their attitude, that's where the power is going to be. So he's going to write a book titled The Rhetoric. I want you to know this word. He's going to define it. It's a real simple definition. And the definition of rhetoric is the ability in a given case to employ all available means of persuasion. Now, he's not talking about physical violence. He's talking about other ways to change. And ladies and gentlemen, if you get just a small fraction of what we're going to be teaching you here in the next 3 weeks, you're going to gain power. And you're going to start finding that you're a more persuasive person. You're going to make more sense to people. You can get your way more often when you're in the right, because I'm going to ask you to use these tricks for good instead of for wrong, self-centered reasons, okay? So, all right, so we've got the rhetoric, and there's several branches of rhetoric, what he calls appeals. We're going to start with the best one. That I always like to start with the best. That he's going to call logos. It's where we get our word logical, okay? There are 2 types of logos, 2 types of reasoning. But before we get to that, let's talk about what reasoning is. As a matter of fact, let's put in your notes critical thinking. Let's put this all for today, just under today's date. How many of you have heard this term critical thinking thrown around? People say, okay, we're going to practice our critical thinking skills today. Keep your hand up if you know what it means. It's the ability to using evidence or reasoning to make a claim. So using evidence or reasoning to make a claim. That's what critical thinking is. Now there's two parts to this. That's the first part. That's kind of the weapon of critical thinking. It also is a shield. Okay, it's a defense. It's also or discerning when your opponent has not done so. Okay, so write that down. So first it's the using evidence to make your claim, and also it's discerning when your opponent has not used good evidence to make his claim. Because if you're in an argument, people will, you see this all the time on TV. People will say their opinions and they'll shout their opinions in loud, serious sounding voices, but it's still an opinion. It's not evidence. So you can call them out on that. Say, okay, well, what you're saying here is just an opinion. It's not a fact. So it's being able to shoot down your opponent when they have failed to use good reasoning or evidence to make their claim. So it's a shield. Okay? We're going to work on that. So we're talking about evidence. This is going to tie in with logos. And there's two types of reasoning in logos. The first is called inductive reasoning. I'm giving you a lot of terms for your notes today. I need you to get them all in there. So inductive reasoning is where we induce the general claim or proposition, trying to spell here, proposition, by using specific evidence. Okay, so if we're thinking about the direction of your thinking on this, your thinking is going from the specific to the general. So here's this overarching general verdict or claim I want to make. So we're going to call that our general proposition. Okay? Now, if I'm an attorney in a criminal trial, maybe it's that this defendant is guilty of murder, and I want to prove that to the jury. How do I do that? Well, I'm going to need you specific evidence. So I've got the fingerprints. I've got the gun that was left at the scene. I've got the testimony of the witness down the hall. And I've got maybe some other witness, some other evidence that was left, the footprint. Okay, all of these things are going to be brought out in the trial as specific evidence that's going to be displayed to the jury and explained, right? So these specifics, from these we induce the jury to agree with us that that defendant is guilty or whatever it is I'm trying to prove. And you guys already know how to do this, right? Because when you use quoted specifics from a line of poetry to make some claim about a poem, you're already thinking inductively. Okay, so this is kind of something we've been training you guys to do for years, using specifics. We always tell you, be more specific, right? All right, so where have I gone too fast in terms of what rhetoric is, what critical thinking is, and most recently here, what inductive reasoning is? Where do I need to back up on those terms? Are we feeling fairly comfortable at an introductory level with those things? You'd speak up. Don't be intimidated by the camera. Okay? It's your education. All right, now, here's the thing. When someone's using evidence, we need to ask ourselves, well, first of all, what is evidence? What are we talking about? So let's list the 4 types of evidence. And it's interesting, Aristotle comes up with this over 2,400 years ago, and we're still using his text. So 4 types of evidence. Okay, so the first type is going to be a fact. What is a fact? Something we can verify? Yes? I can actually take a tape measure and verify that it's a higher ceiling here, a greater distance here at the front of the room than at the back of the room. I can demonstrate with a tape measure that there's a slope to the ceiling here. I can verify that. That's a fact, all right? So it's verifiable. Okay? We can quantify it, we can verify it, we can hold up the evidence, say there it is, there's the bullet that killed the guy. We have the evidence in hand, it's a fact. Okay? Before we move on, let's make sure we understand what an opinion is. So an opinion is a judgment. Make a note of that. So an opinion is a judgment. It's not a fact, it's a judgment. Or a prediction. If you vote for this guy, he's going to get us in debt. Okay, well that's an opinion. It's not a fact. It's a prediction. Or it is a statement of obligation. Okay? You need to do your homework because if you want to be a good student. Well, that's saying something like you need to or you should. That's a statement of obligation. It's not a fact. Yes? Opinions, judgment, predictions, statements of obligation, using should or need. Okay? Any of those kind of statements are not facts. Okay? All right, then we also have a statistic. A statistic is a fact in number form. Okay, so it's a number. It's a fact expressed as a number. Now, be careful with statistics, because if you use a statistic in an argument, and you'll see this when we watch the debate videos, if you use a statistic, your opponent can then turn it on you. Okay, so for example, what if I went down to the school board to make a presentation and I said, we're so proud at the Nordhoff High School English department, we had 82% of our juniors last year scored proficient on our test, on our standardized test. And I give them some charts, etc. Someone in the audience could stand up and say, do you mean to tell me you're proud of the fact that 18%, almost 1 in 5 of your juniors are not proficient in language arts? You think that's good? Almost a fifth of them can't be very proficient in what you teach. You call that success. So you see, what I've just given as a statistic to boost myself, he's just turned it on me to tear me down. So just be careful. Statistics can be turned against you. Okay, then you have expert testimony. Okay, so the question is, what is an expert? Okay, we're not talking about just anyone coming up and testifying. Now this is when you use an authoritative source in a research paper. You quote some researcher, some expert. If you're an attorney, you bring up the expert in that field. If you're talking about the bullet that was used to kill someone, you have a ballistics expert. And an expert is someone who has specialized knowledge through experience or education. Okay? So an expert has specialized knowledge through experience or their education, or both. Okay? And then finally, there's personal observation. And I'm not putting this last because it's the weakest. Actually, it's very powerful. This is when you have a witness. Okay, if there's a fight that breaks out in lunch in the cafeteria, you know, there'd be all these rumors about who started it. And you show up in period 5 and you're sitting next to someone, he says, hey, I can tell you who threw the first punch. I was standing right behind him. Would you believe him? It's like, he was right there. He's saying, I was right there, I saw who threw the first punch. That's very convincing evidence. So when you have personal observations, that can be convincing. The problem is sometimes people lie. So what attorneys will do is if they have a witness saying something that's powerful, they'll try to get a second witness to back it up. That's really, they call that corroboration. Okay, so we've got 4 types of evidence. Now, how do we know if the evidence is good? Before I were to go and make my claim and use that evidence, I need to test it. So let's make a list of tests for evidence to make sure it's good evidence. Okay, so first of all, is it clear and understandable? A lot of times you'll see, especially if it's from some kind of real specialty kind of journal, something might be worded in such a way that it can't really even be understood. So if you can't get it in some form where your audience will understand it, it's not going to help your case that you're building, is it? Okay, so they need to be able to understand it. Okay, is it from a good source? Okay, now, our president says that everything is fake news, right? Have you guys heard that? Yeah. Okay, now I'm just going to tell you, not everything is fake news. Are you okay with me telling you that?
Yes, sir.
There are actually people who are professional journalists, trained journalists, who are still doing responsible journalism. And yes, they will make mistakes, but if they have integrity, before they put something out there in print and publicize it, they make sure that their story is as accurate as it can be. You know, if someone gives them some really interesting report, they will go and try to get other people to back it up. They'll try to find documents, etc. So there's still people out there collecting news in a responsible way, but there's a lot of fake, bogus news. In fact, a lot of publications have even started resorting to, if you look on online, you'll see something will look like a news story, but it turns out to be an ad. Have you ever seen that? Yeah. Say, have you checked out the latest news? And you'll see some news thing, but after you start reading it, you realize they're trying to sell you something. So that's kind of bogus. And so you have to ask, does the source that's reporting this have some special agenda? Are they trying to spin it? Or are they trying to sell you something? Okay? And if that's the case, it's probably not a good source. Would you agree? Okay? But there are still some good places to find news. You just have to be willing to, well, that's part of going out into that world out there that's trying to deceive you, you know, and be able to recognize when it's from a good source. Okay, is it relevant? Okay, it might be true, it might be from a good source, but it might not be very much to the point of what I'm trying to prove. So if it's only kind of peripherally related to the issue, maybe we need to set it aside. Okay, is it timely? Okay, if I'm doing a report on climate change and global warming, and I'm citing a study that was done in the 1970s, that's 40 years ago. That's probably not going to be the best, most timely research on that topic, right? Is it persuasive? First and foremost, is it persuasive? Is it going to actually get people to change their minds? And we also want, let's not forget this one, is it accurate? Okay, if it's inaccurate, we certainly won't consider that to be good evidence. All right. So we didn't get as far as we'd hoped today, but this is a start. We're going to continue tomorrow and learn more about fact. We're going to start tomorrow. I'm going to give you a little quiz to see if you can tell the difference between a fact and an opinion, and then we'll proceed.